Our next speaker is going to be introduced by someone who is also very special and will be on our program a little bit later on the panel. And now I'd like to introduce Jeff Chittister, who's going to be introducing our next speaker. Please welcome Jeff.
Hey guys, how you doing? Live free! Outstanding, I love you guys. I can always count on you. Thank you. You know, whenever you get ready to introduce somebody, it's, I don't know if you watched over the last couple days what the press called a cattle call. It's unfortunate they've already started with the negatives. And someone stood up on that stage and they had a piece of paper in front of them. And a lot of times when we introduce people at these events, there's no passion towards the person that we're introducing. We appreciate them. We like them. We're glad that they came to our events. And we read from their web pages or their resumes, which tells you nothing about the individual. If you were to do nothing more than go online and read about this next individual, you'd find out that he grew up in a law enforcement family, which I appreciate because I come from a law enforcement family. That he studied math and science at Northwest Missouri State University. He started King Construction in 1975, and he built that business. He built that business from one bulldozer. That's what you'd find out about this next gentleman. But what you don't know about this next gentleman are all the other things that you should know. Every single day, every single one of you are out there fighting the battle for the good cause. Where are my state legislators? Raise your hands or stand up. Either one I'll take. Every single day, our men and women in blue and our men and women who fight for this country on behalf of our country in those proud uniforms, we say U.S. Air Force, U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Navy, U.S. Army. I forget anyone? U.S. Marines. Any veterans here today? Please stand up. Thank you, guys. Every single day, we all go about our day. And the one thing that we hope for is that the people that we elect to represent us. Every single day, we jump into the trench to fight the battles, and we hope that the guy jumping in behind us isn't stabbing us in the back, but instead pointing the gun in the right direction. That's what we expect, and this next gentleman does that. Every single day, he walks on the floor of Congress, often the sole protector of the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. Often the only person fighting for the best interests of this country, for his sons, for his wife, for his grandchildren. He does that because one day he started a business with one bulldozer. He had a pair of blue jeans on, a t-shirt on, and a shovel. And he did the job that many of us did. He does it because he remembers those times. He remembers you. He defends it just because he knows he needs to. And sadly, we do not have enough people who do that for us. But this next person fights for us every day. How many of you believe right now that Congress has our best interest in mind? Raise your hand. 100% of the time. 365 days a year. This next person I'm going to introduce to you has that interest in mind. 365 days a year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. He clutches that Constitution like the eagle, and he holds on to it, and he reminds us every single day of what it stands for. I am so proud to call him friend because that's what he is. And I don't offer that easy. It's a high bar that I have for people I call friends. But this next gentleman is well deserving of it. He is a true defender of the Constitution. He is the new defending mothers and fathers of that Constitution. And if we were fighting the revolution today, and which we are, he would be one of our founding fathers. ladies and gentlemen, please give a nice big round of applause from Iowa, but adopted by New Hampshire, U.S. Congressman Steve King.
Great New Hampshire welcome. I came here and you all energize me, and this thing works both ways. I am jazzed up. I get to call Jeff Chittister a friend. I will tell you that if you go to my office in Washington D.C., you'll see a wooden sign up there right behind my desk that says "Live." It says "Live free or die." That's thanks to Jeff and Matt Chittister that's there. And John Stark beat us to that. Iowa has the less masculine version of your state motto. Ours says, "Our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain." Not the same level of conviction as "live free or die." But when I hear Jack talk, it energizes me. If we're not willing to stand up at some point and fight for our rights, when you say you're ready to eat the last few Delta Smelt, I actually thought I'd put them in a jar and drink them. But we need to defend our freedom. And in my growing up years, listening to my father and law enforcement family, as Jeff said in the introduction, one of the things that he said to me was, he had the poem memorized that so matters this day. And by the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled, there the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world. That's today. And I remember sitting there, I would describe it at his knee, and I said, "Dad, is that bridge still there?" Now, I'm going to tell you, I know the truth of this, but here's how he said it to me. He was very seldom wrong. He said, "No, it's not." And I said, "What happened to it?" "Well, it was swept away by the floods." That's later on in the poem. So I presume that's what he was going by, because Dad didn't travel a lot. And so I said, "Did they rebuild it?" "No." "Why not?" "Well, they didn't need the bridge anymore. That time had passed." Okay, so that stuck in my head. But as the years went by and I got to be an adult and I started to read and soak through the history, I couldn't stand the idea of never having been there. And so about a year and a half or so ago, my wife Marilyn and I flew into Providence, rented a little convertible, an American-made Ford Mustang actually, and we drove the route and then stopped and poked our way along from Lexington to Concord to the Rood Bridge that now arches the flood still. And that spot, to stand on that spot that day, let alone stand on that spot this day, really anchors me into the God-given history of this country. What they were willing to face, what they were willing to fight for. And our job's not nearly as hard as theirs. Nearly as hard. There was no concept of God-given liberty and a government of, by, and for the people, and the people were empowered, and they used that power, and they transferred that to an elected representative Republican form of government. It was the king's deer. It was the king's subject. And this idea, yes, it began to form clear back to the Magna Carta, and you had some people like John Locke and others that spoke to this, but this concept wasn't within the heads of the culture. They had to first get this inspiration from God. They had to speak it. They had to write it. They had to pour it into the Federalist Papers later on, and they had to sell it to the colonists, who then had to buy the idea and be willing to stand up and fight for God-given liberty at that bridge and in Lexington and on the way with all of the other battles that you all know about that are a deep part of the history of the real estate that New England is. And so think about how hard that is, to come up with an idea, that principle that would stand the test of time, the longest constitution in the history of the world, to be as long as we can possibly help make it. They built the idea and they defended it. They had to sell it, and they had to go through Valley Forge and all the other battles to do that. What's our job? Keep it. Yes, we have to restore the pillars of American exceptionalism. That's our job. And we have this great God-given gift of being the unchallenged greatest nation in the world. And so we have the strongest economy the world has ever seen. It's slow now, but it's got a GDP like the world has never seen. We have more technology. We have more capital. We have more know-how. Any problem that could ever been solved in the history of the world, we're in a better position to do so than anybody ever was. And you can go back to the Greeks and the Romans. You can go anything that came out of Western Europe, which too often the left wants to emulate what they do. We have those tools to work with. And what's the barrier in the way? If we don't solve the problem, if we don't commit the capital, if we don't generate the resources, if we don't deploy the know-how, it's a political barrier in the way. And what is that political barrier? Well, it is the enemies of freedom that are in the way. It is the people who worship at the altar of Karl Marx and their descendants and their affiliates that are our enemies. There is good in the world and then there's evil in the world. And those two forces have been clashing for a long time. And it took place in the Garden of Eden. It took place time after time after time with these temptations. And so we need to believe in who we are. Now, just a week ago, I found myself sitting in Berlin in negotiations with some of the members of the German Bundestag, and they had brought to this dinner a French intellectual. His first name was Francois. Now, I know, sounds a little ironic. You actually speak French a little better here than we do in Iowa. You're the mountains, we're the prairies. But in any case, we do have Des Moines, that was French. And but this Frenchman, Francois, he was there to give us his intellectual lecture to our luncheon, and I'm sitting across from him as essentially the chair of our delegation. And so he began to tell us a whole lot of things, but in it was, he said, China is now a superpower. You need to accept the idea that China is a superpower. You're not the only superpower anymore. There are two superpowers in the world, China and the United States, and there's nothing you can do about that because their economy is growing, yours is shrinking, and he doesn't want to talk about the shrinking population, but that's another piece of the demographics we need to think about. And so this meeting needed to end. And I don't have time to dig down through all his books, all his papers, and all his lectures that nobody challenged. So I just got up and I said, well, if China is a superpower and there's nothing that we can do about it, then America shall become a super duper power. And that's the American attitude, and that's the American way. If anybody says to us we can't do it, we say, I'll show you. And we will, and we have a good lot of ways to do that. I just want to touch 3 points here on policy points, and maybe I'll slow down or maybe I won't, but Betsy really hit this thing well. Things we must do. Full 100% rip it out by the roots, repeal of Obamacare without hesitation. Last cycle, with all of our Republican nominees, every one of them signed my big poster pledge that pledges to repeal Obamacare, and it does say rip it out by the roots, as if it had never been enacted, and that's also some of the language in the repeal bill that I wrote in the night that Obamacare passed and was messaged to the president. But when I hear people, well, we need to amend it, we want to save the good stuff, maybe we want to repeal it, but we first want to have a deal on what we're going to replace it with. You got to sell the idea that we're going to rip it out by the roots first. And then, yes, there are things we need to do, but repeal Obamacare needs to be a plank in the platform of every Republican candidate that comes to New Hampshire and comes to Iowa and goes to South Carolina. And there can be no equivocation, there can be no hesitation. That needs to be a plank in their platform. The second thing we need... The second thing we need to address is, and this country is struggling along because there are people that benefit, Republicans and Democrats on both sides of this, and that is we need to fix this immigration problem here in the United States. Now, I have a certain number of rules that I think we should live by if we're going to fix immigration. And as Jeff said, I grew up in a law enforcement family. I'm steeped in this Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. I have great respect for the rule of law. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Any law, if we don't like it, if it doesn't work for us, our job is not to ignore it, not to allow a president to usurp the Article I authority out of the Constitution and make up laws he sees fit. We've got to go to the Congress and ask the Congress to change the law. And if you don't like the supreme law of the land, it's a steep, high bar. Then you amend the Constitution. But you do not ignore it. You do not define it away. And you don't tolerate a president that decides he's going to claim Article I authority. So, the essential point here is, with all the things that have happened, the ignoring of and the refusal to enforce immigration law, we've got to restore the respect for the rule of law. And now, you've not heard one word of criticism of Ronald Reagan in the last 3 days, and I've sat in on almost all these speeches. And I've loved every minute that I've been here able to do this. But Ronald Reagan did let me down in 1986 when he signed the Amnesty Act of 1986. And I will tell you, I was in my office at the time. I'd been listening to the reports on the debates in the House and the Senate on the Amnesty Act. And I believe whatever they voted in the House, whatever they voted in the Senate, Ronald Reagan would see this principle, the rule of law, so clearly that he would veto the Amnesty Act. And when he didn't, when I heard the news, I was listening to the radio when they announced that he had signed the Amnesty Act, I kicked a dent in my filing cabinet. Because, kind of like Jack's attitude, I knew then that we would be working to restore the respect for the rule of law for a long time before we put that back together. And look what's happened. Each president since then has enforced the immigration law less and less and less. I've been more and more disappointed as they did it less and less and less. And now we get to this president, and he's sent out the welcome mat all over the world. I mean, I've gone down to the border. I remember standing just last year in late July at, Roma, Texas, with Michelle Bachmann, by the way. We're on the banks of the Rio Grande River talking to 2 Border Patrol agents and 2 city police officers at Roma, Texas. And the people on the other side were out there swimming and doing their things. Here came a car of 2 coyotes. They got an inflatable raft out of the trunk, pumped it up with one of those old bicycle-type pumps, took it out there and set it in the river, put a pregnant lady in the river with her 2 bags of her goodies or her property, and they ran this raft across the river, brought it up against the shore of the United States. One of the coyotes got out, helped her out, handed her her bags. They got back. The 2 coyotes then took off with the raft. They left her standing on the bank on the U.S. side. They went back, deflated the raft, folded it up, put it in the trunk, and drove away. She stood there and patiently waited because the service wasn't so great in America that day. It happened to be that they brought her over on purpose during a shift change. And so those 2 Border Patrol agents, they were getting off duty, so they went back to their station. And I met one of the Border Patrol agents that was coming to work. I stopped him and talked to him. He didn't even know that his first job was supposed to be to pick her up. So that's the level of animation with the illegal immigrant coming into America in plain sight. It's greater when somebody's writing a speeding ticket in Kyron, Iowa. So the president has turned them into a welcome mat. He has said, if you don't follow my directive and ignore immigration law, if you go out and enforce the law, there will be consequences. That's the president of the United States. So how do we restore this rule of law? Well, first we have to elect a president that will do that. And I have a bill that I think is one that's universally good for all of this, and most of all that is in place that we need. This bill is called the New IDEA Act. IDEA, the acronym IDEA, stands for Illegal Deduction Elimination Act. It brings the IRS into play. I found some good use for the IRS. I actually want to abolish them, but if they're going to be here, I want them to come in and just during the normal audit say to the employer, you know, if you're going to hire illegals, you're not going to be able to deduct wages and benefits paid to them as a business expense. And so, and by the way, you can accumulate a 6-year statute of limitations on that. So the illegals that you paid over 6 years, then the IRS can come in and go, let me see, here are their Social Security numbers, these are the list, this is your Schedule C deduction. I'll run the numbers through E-Verify. We'll give them safe harbor if they use E-Verify, but the IRS then can use E-Verify. And they'll say, well, here's this $1 million that you wrote off as a business expense. You knew or should have known because you had access to E-Verify, so we're sorry, now you're going to pay tax on that. So that's what, a 35% corporate tax, interest and penalty? Let it be a business decision. Then you don't have to rely on the rest of the federal government to show up and do a raid. The employers will fear the audit, and they will clean up their own act. New Idea Act. All right, I better keep moving on here. I need to say some things about radical Islam. We are fighting an ideology. We must defeat the ideology of radical Islam. Now, we've defeated ideologies before. I mean, we wiped out 3 of them in half a century during the 20th century. And I'll say fascism/Nazism was one, Japanese imperialism was another, and the Marxism embodied within the Soviet Union was another. I mean, if you can do a hat trick in a half a century, can't we defeat these guys that are still... And we have to believe in who we are. They believe in who they are. We've had to fight them since clear back. 1,400 years we've been taking them on. We don't think about it that way. They do. When they executed 21 Coptic Christians on the shores of Tripoli, that they called them, they said, we executed the Crusaders. That's how they think about us. They are commanded to kill or convert until a whole world is Islam. And when President al-Sisi of Egypt, who is a Muslim and a moderate Muslim, and perhaps the individual on this planet that can turn the Muslim religion back to the thing that they erroneously call peace, but can convert the Muslim religion into an actual religion of peace, when he said in his speech at Al-Azhar University, is it possible to accept the idea that the whole world has to be killed so that Muslims can live? And he asked that question of me personally about a month and a half ago. It's a rhetorical question, but it's powerfully delivered, and it tells you how he sees this. If Egypt can be teamed together with the UAE and the Jordanians, we've got to bring the Kurds into this fight, but if they can turn the philosophy of Islam over and begin to purge the radicalism from their midst, then it's a far more bloodless endeavor than it would likely be if we can't get that ideology to help us. But if we can't get them to help us, we still have to fight them. So here's the thing. No presidential candidate has laid out a comprehensive approach on how to defeat the ideology. And I'm just going to name them and not go into detail for time's sake. But the first thing we need to do is commit cyber warfare against them. Not just defensive, offensive. We need to go after them all over the internet. They're using the internet globally. That's why they can operate globally. You know, when they had to just follow the camel caravan, they couldn't move very fast. Well, now we have airplanes, we have the internet, and they're all over the world. So we need to shut that down, and we need to use misinformation and kill those internet sites. That's one thing. Cyber warfare and ramped up cyber warfare. Number 2, we need to shut off the funds everywhere that they originate from, every place they're transferred through, and every place that they go that they help radical Islam in all of its forms. Number 3, their educational system. Thousands of madrasas around the world. We have mosques here in America where they're teaching hatred and they're identifying and radicalizing. That radicalizing word, by the way, sounds like an excuse to be not personally responsible. They are. We need to go to those places and do those things we can do to shut down that educational system that transfers this into the hatred for the next generation. That's a difficult thing to do constitutionally in this country. It's easier in other countries. Next thing we do is build that alliance I mentioned with those countries that can and will help us in the Middle East. Then expand our human intelligence around the world so that we know what they are doing everywhere all the time. Now that we've set this all up, yes, we need American advisors, and we need some people on the ground in these locations where we're going to have to fight them. And we need to call in the airstrikes, and we need to arm the Kurds completely and work with these alliances. But our human intelligence will make our kinetic action effective, and it will limit the involvement of Americans in the kinetic action. All of this needs to go on aggressively until the point comes where they have given up the idea that they can take us on, and that the idea that their culture is somehow going to dominate ours. It is not. We are Western civilization, Western Christendom, as Winston Churchill described it in 1948. We have to continue to believe in who we are, and if our culture is going to survive. And so I want to just encourage you, I want to hear the next president put together a plan to defeat radicalism. And then... Now I'll just put just some points together. I'm going to use the IRS if I have to have them, but, you know, I'm happy to throw them over the side and just abolish them too. And I have long been for the fair tax, which is a national retail sales tax that's the only proposal that abolishes the IRS. And here's what goes on. The federal government has the first lien on all productivity in America. When you walk in and punch your time clock, Uncle Sam puts his hand out. And when he gets the tax he wants, he puts it in his pocket. In our state, then the governor's got his hand out. Then he gets his share. After a while, you get your share. But a tax is a punishment. When you tax productivity, all earning, savings, and investment is taxed in this country by the federal government. They get there first. Well, it punishes you. Why wouldn't we let everybody earn, save, and invest all they want to and let you decide to pay your taxes when you consume? Now, I'll just shorthand this. I had Alan Greenspan pick me apart on this one day, eye to eye, just like Betsy and me. And I said, challenge me on anything I'm weak on. And I went through the whole list. And he said, well, you left out it provides an incentive for earnings, savings, and investment. Add that to it. Keep saying all the things you're saying. So okay, here's the shorthand. The fair tax, H.R. 27, does everything good that everybody's tax policy does that is good. It does them all, and it does them all better. End of story, okay? Long story, but that's it, compressed. Fair tax, let's transform this economy, fix the balance of trade, give you all that you earn, give you your freedom, and end the IRS so we would have never heard of Lois Lerner if I'd have had my way. Balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. This Congress has no discipline. You need to discipline the United States Congress by amending our Constitution and doing it the right way. Then, school choice. You know, with the federal government forming a curriculum and constantly taking our tax resources and trying to tell us that we all shall fit into one square and there's only one way to educate kids, parents are the ones that need to make that decision. Let's just put that money into a single check, and I will call it a voucher, staple that check to the kid's shirt collar, and point to the parents and say, get that child an education. Done. All schools will be improved with competition. So, a strong national defense, which I've pretty well addressed, but then it comes down to this. We are an exceptional nation, and of course the president doesn't believe that. He's been deconstructing American civilization since his first day in office and probably before. But we love our country, and we didn't know our place in history. And our place in history is a continuum that goes back to Moses and beyond. The milestones of Western civilization, Mosaic law, Greek science in the foundation age of reason, Roman law, Old English common law, free enterprise, the Industrial Revolution, the birth of Jesus, the things that he taught us, the redemption that we have that most of the rest of the world doesn't have. Put those pieces all together and think about that and many more in Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation. And I'm a Catholic that has to compete with the Protestant work ethic, and I think we do pretty good. Pull that all together and think. It came over here to this continent at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution with unlimited natural resources. At least we thought at the time, and we're learning again. They aren't as limited as we thought. All of this and this work ethic, and we settled this continent from the mountains to the prairies to the ocean white with foam in the blink of an historical lifetime. This is a God-given gift, this country that we have. And we have a duty to deliver in our generation, in our time, on a task that's not as hard as our founding fathers were faced with. A blessing that's far greater than they imagined, and a destiny that needs to be turned again into an ascending destiny. Thank you so much. God bless America. Thank you, Fran.
So much, Congressman.
Hey, thanks for having me here. I just love you guys.
Croc TV.